Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We appreciate you spending a portion of your day for this conversation. We're going to talk about rethinking the in-house outside counsel relationship. There's a lot of pieces and parts to that. One of the things that we specifically want to cover is the data and data ownership and docketing and who does what and what does that mean for the systems in place in-house and the systems outside, and how these things can be streamlined and communicated. And it's just going to be a wide-ranging conversation. Hopefully you will all have questions. If you have questions, please put them into the Q&A box. If you have specific questions that are maybe a little bit more detailed than we'll get to with the panel, please put that in the chat box. We have Katie monitoring the chat box on behalf of Tradespace so that she can get you answers right away if you have specific questions. And of course, if you want to chat amongst yourselves, go right ahead and have at it. Look forward to this conversation. Without any further ado, let me just kick it over to Renee to introduce our panelists. Renee.
Thanks, Jean. So today on our panel, we have Randy Canis. He is Associate General Counsel for Technology, Privacy, and IP at Smarter Technologies, with more than 20 years of experience at the intersection of law and innovation. He has led IP strategy in high growth and Fortune 15 environments, including serving as Director of IP at Equipment Share and Chief Patent Counsel at a global enterprise. Randy is also a longtime adjunct law professor teaching topics from patent law to AI governance. Next, we have Jason Becker. He's a senior IP and patent counsel at Booz Allen Hamilton, where he advises clients on the full spectrum of intellectual property. His experience spans both in-house and private practice, with prior roles at 8x8 and leading IP firms. Jason focuses on building and protecting IP portfolios, enabling product development, and guiding strategic partnerships while helping organizations navigate complex, evolving IP landscapes. Next, we have Justin Rurko. He is Vice President of Strategy and Business Development at Tradespace and a seasoned IP attorney with over 20 years of experience across law, corporate strategy, and growth. Previously, he served as in-house IP counsel at KPMG, where he also co-founded the firm's IP consulting practice. A recognized member of the IAM Strategy 300, Justin is known for connecting intellectual property strategy with business growth and innovation. And last but not least, we have our moderator. He is Gene Quinn, a patent attorney and longtime thought leader in the IP world. He launched IPWatchdog in 1999, which has grown into one of the most trusted voices in patent law and innovation policy. He's widely recognized for his expertise in software patentability and U.S. patent procedure, and he's been repeatedly honored as one of the top IP influencers and strategists in the global IP community. Back to you, Gene.
Great. Thanks a lot, Renee. And again, thank you for all being here. I really appreciate you being here today. And what I'd like to do is go around the horn and get our panelists involved right from the very beginning here to get their preliminary thoughts on what it is that we're going to talk about. We have a lot of stuff to cover, a lot of different chapters, I suppose, if you will, within the inside counsel, outside counsel relationship. And Randy, we can start with you. I know, we've known each other for years. I know this is a topic that you've given, great deal of thought to. We've gone to a number of different places and instituted uh, uh, I don't even know how you would characterize, but you go and you reforms and changes and streamlining processes. And I know you're a great person to have here on this panel. So we'll start with you. Where do you want people to begin to understand this big topic today before we roll up our sleeves and dive in?
Sure. I think I've narrowed it down to 3 points, which would be prepared, plan for the future, and be adaptable. Because all those three things are going to make you very successful in your career, both with your organization and beyond, and will allow you to make the necessary pivots, both by that planning, adaptiveness, and then just ultimately having what people need, because you've thought about what they need before that they even know that they want it. And so that advanced preparation is ultimately going to make you more successful and provide better support in terms of the organization that you're in.
Great. Thanks a lot, Randy. And next, why don't we go, Jason, to you to get your thoughts on this topic as well?
Yeah, thanks, Gene. Yeah, I haven't been on both sides of the coin in-house and as well as working at outside counsel. I think, it's important. And I think the main thing for me is understanding your organization and the strategy of your organization and how you can use outside counsel to further that. I think that's really an understated thing. And, as you have alluded to, there's also hidden costs and things of that nature with managing that relationship. So I think it's really an important focus for me, and as well as understanding, your landscape of your organization. Where are you at in your process with your IP portfolio management? So I think understanding that and applying it is really helpful for, especially when you're using AI and other tools and also managing outside firms and integrations.
Great. Yeah, we're going to come back to that for sure. Is where are you in your stage of development? I think that matters so important, so much for particularly the in-house folks. Justin, let's go to you. Feel free to say whatever it is you want to say. If you have anything you want to address what Randy or Jason have said, please go right ahead. But where do you start with this topic? Where do you think the audience should be as we jump into it?
Thanks, Gene. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. I think one area that is especially interesting for me, and Jason touched on this, is the area of AI and what it means for the in-house outside counsel relationship. It touches every aspect of the relationship, from how we work together to who does what work, to how we manage document flows, to the intelligence that we can use to drive our processes. That's what's interesting to me. And where I think we're going to see some interesting developments is, in my opinion, AI is not just like cloud. If you look at the adoption of cloud over previous 10 years or so, it was often viewed as a plug and play sort of thing. It's just a simple change from how we did life before. AI invites a fundamental rethink of what we do and how we do it. And I think there's going to be some very interesting opportunities to change the way we operate using AI. Even simple things like, when I was in-house, we relied extensively on outside counsel for all things docketing. What does that look like in the future when we have better technology? A key piece of this, a constraint for people, is not having staff to maintain the docket, but what happens when you have AI-driven automation to do that? Where do you want your data to sit, for example? What does that look like? So I think there's really interesting opportunities with AI.
There certainly are an awful lot of opportunities here, and I think we would not be having this conversation today if it was not for AI. At least, not to say that the dynamic between in-house counsel and outside counsel is not something we want to talk about. It's something we have talked about many times in the past. But the conversation I think that's going to unfold here, just to preview it, really is Justin was just talking about. It's driven by AI because it allows a lot more robust processing of information data, doing legal work from in-house teams. And then you got to figure out, how do you actually leverage your outside team in a way that makes sense for you based on where you are in your development cycle. So that's what I think what we have in store. Let me end the poll question here, the first poll question. I'll share it with the panelists so that you can see basically who is in our audience here today. We have a number of people from all of the different buckets, mostly outsourced, hybrid, mostly in-house, and then other. So we have really a audience that goes across the spectrum here today. So let me go back to the PowerPoint here, because we have the first question that we have here. Let me share this with you all here. So the first question that we have to talk about here is this in-house versus outside dilemma. What work is so important that you should do it in-house? Maybe that's a good place to start. And Randy, we can start with you here. I mean, is there some stuff that you think that is just so important that we need to do it inside and then pitch it over the transom if it's going to go outside, or is this making a mountain out of a molehill?
Sure. Well, so much for organizations is providing education, providing a contact, providing that experience, and trying to see where the teams are at from a technological perspective and a development perspective. And it's really difficult to outsource that type of work to outside counsel, because you really, if you're going to be, again, depending on the size of the organization and what responsibilities look like, if you're really going to be ensconced in your company, you're going to need to have the deepest understanding that you can have of the technology, certainly better than your outside counsel. You need to know more about how things are operating, who has the technology, who's doing the developments, what are we getting ready to launch. I think Jason already mentioned it depends where you are in the maturity cycle. Maybe your organization is very mature, where there's very certain gates that have to occur in order for a product to launch, or maybe it's a little bit more loose. And for instance, in a startup environment or less sophisticated. And so really managing the people, the technology, and the function internally, I think is just really, really difficult to outsource.
So Jason, let me bring that you in on this because you kind of brought in the where are you in your development? I mean, and there's a number of different ways I think to look at that. I mean, potentially how big is your in-house team? That's got to play a role. I mean, you could be a really developed, mature company and have a small in-house team, and that maybe influences things. Also, I would think, how familiar are your people in-house with, like, for example, we're talking about here today, the patent process. Are they newbies? Or maybe they're not newbies, but maybe this is the first time many of them have really done it on their own. I mean, I think all of these things have to influence this decision, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And my fault for taking us down this rabbit hole.
No,
So
no,
sorry,
no. This is the
but
rabbit hole to
I love
talk
it.
about, I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah, I think it's important as Randy highlighted and as everyone's talked about on the panel. I think you have to balance those things. I love AI for information gathering and things like that. For example, a pain point I've seen over the years is maybe invention disclosure collection. Maybe some organizations are smaller and you're having trouble connecting with, your stakeholders and inventors, and you can't collect information like that. So at least having that and improving the process can be great for that purpose. But if there's other things that you have to add quality and insights, as Randy was highlighting, for example, I see a couple of risks here that are worth talking about. For example, relationships within your organization, you have to manage those, and having that with outside counsel could have a negative impact if you shift everything over to them and you don't really manage that properly, as well as misalignment with your business strategy. We want to make sure that we align with our business strategy and can connect. And what I've seen sometimes is, you may think you have a patent on file for a great innovation and your business is really excited about it, but maybe you don't have the right technology covered in there that you thought you did. So I think there's those types of issues that could pop up, and I think it's really important to manage those.
So let me ask you with that last thing, do you suppose that that happens more often when in-house teams are in control or the outside teams are in control? Because I can make
Exactly.
the
Great
case in my
question.
own mind for either being really problematic. Like
I think
what
it's
you
more
own.
when outside counsel is in control, and that's one of the risks you run with actually outsourcing everything, right? So if you're not managing that or don't have, maybe it's just you don't have the time, right? But that's a good point. You gotta prioritize where you want to spend your time. What's most routine to you and that you can outsource, as well as what's going to have the biggest impact to you. I think that's things that have visibility inside your company really can impact you. People care about metrics and KPIs, but they also care about aligning to business strategy. So I think, maybe that's a good way to frame things and look at it saying like, hey, is that how the lens you want to look at it? And I think that could be really an interesting take.
Yeah, Randy, did I see you pop on your microphone again to say something there?
I try to keep the microphone on, but I think everything you said makes sense to me. Again, trying to align interests and making sure that you're serving the business is key. And I think it's very difficult for outside counsel to be in control of that relationship because a lot of times outside counsel is the counsel who's drafting the patent applications. I mean, yes, they're also trying to develop relationships internally. They want inventors to say, yes, I'd like to use certain outside counsel going forward because I feel like they're doing a great job. But really, in-house counsel needs to own that relationship and be a resource. And truly, where people inside the business and the technology functions feel comfortable approaching you and saying, hey, these are my pain points, or this is what I'm working on, and what should I do? And then it really provides you with that opportunity as in-house counsel to provide that guidance.
So, Justin, let me bring you into this part here because as a provider of the management tools that really are used in-house and they're used by law firms, and I think what we're getting at here at the moment is this communication between the two and knowing, somebody's got to have their eye on the ball here, right? Like what's best for the company, while at the same time, well, what's actually achievable at the patent office, for example. How do you streamline all of that to have the right information in front of the right people and kind of triage properly?
Yeah, that's a good tee up. One of the things that I think is one of the big issues is just managing your docket and knowing what you have, right? I've been in organizations where everything was outsourced to outside counsel, including managing the docket. And what that means at the end of the day for me as the in-house person is I don't have great visibility into what we actually own and what we have. If I let them do all things docket management, and we understand why that's often the case, but not having that information at your fingertips can really impact your ability to make good decisions about your portfolio. And Randy, you used the word that I think is really important as we think about this, and that's maturity. And every IP department and legal department is going to be in different phases of maturity. But the whole concept of a maturity model, I think, is a really useful framework as we think about what are we doing today and what do we want to do tomorrow and how do we get there and really being deliberate about how we evolve as an operation. So, day one, first IP hire, everything goes to outside counsel in terms of management and data and so on. Eventually, how does that change? And again, I think one of the key things is really being able to have those portfolio insights so that you know what a new disclosure means. Is this something that's duplicative? Is it complementary? How does it fit with my portfolio? That's a key issue for me. And beyond that too, Gene, we every place that I've worked is we also relied on outside counsel 100% for prep and pros, but the me of the organization was always managing that process. So we would get drafts from outside counsel. We would take a first look at them before we pushed it to our inventors. The inventor work would come back to me. We pushed it to outside counsel. But we always had an eye, this might sound a little bit cheesy, we always had an eye of customer service. The IP people, we're not litigators. We don't have a mandate to compel people to cooperate with us in the business. So we always looked at managing that outside counsel relationship with the lens, in addition to risk management and quality, it's also how do I make this as easy as possible for my inventors? That was a key question for us because I've worked in organizations where IP was not always the number one priority, not often the case that it is. But the question was, how do we maintain the goodwill of our inventors and not get nasty calls from our leadership that say they weren't hired to do IP, they were hired to invent and do what you got to do. So that was a key thought for us, Gene.
Yeah, I love that. They were not, I hear that so often. They were not hired to try and work with you to get a patent. They were hired to invent. It's like, okay, well, what do you actually think pays for all of this stuff around here? It's
Right.
large whether people like it or not. I mean, and I get that when you're a hammer, the world looks like a nail. And as a patent attorney, I think the world is driven by patents. But if you can't protect what it is that you own, you can't invest in it, and you don't have license, you can't license it. So there is this very important piece that I do think on that level, AI is going to streamline this a lot so that you
Right.
can get really good information from your inventors while not taking up too much of their time. So even if you have a company that has that philosophy, you could still get good information from them. And I do think that AI is going to change an awful lot of these types of things. And maybe I want to follow up with Randy and Jason and get you both to comment on this because one of the things that I'm starting to hear from in-house teams is that they're asking, well, what more can we do? What in terms of like, should we be doing some of the drafting? And maybe not the filing, maybe not the docketing, maybe not the calendaring, maybe not even the polishing it up so it's ready to go, but doing at least some of the stuff on the front end and then throwing it over the transom. Because now with AI tools, they can do it much more efficiently and quickly than they could in the past. And that you would think the in-house people do, and I think this is true, probably have a lot more information about what the company is trying to do, what they're trying to accomplish, where they're trying to go, and more knowledge, peculiar knowledge about the technology itself. So where's that balance in this AI world we live in? Jason, we'll start with you this time.
Yeah, I think it's important to point out that, you are the differentiator there. You have expertise and you were hired for a reason and you can add a lot. But, as the other panelists said, Justin in particular, it's some of these things are routine and you can use them to gather information and create a baseline. So I think it's great for that. AI tools are outstanding for that. But to understand your business objectives and things like that and working them into applications and the process, I think it's important that you add that flavor and and put that on top of it. And I think, as we're highlighting, the relationships with inventors are important too. As Justin pointed out, I think it's great that, sometimes it's a business aspect, but I think it's great to actually build the relationships with the inventors and make sure that they're aware, and have visibility into what they're doing and recognition. That's the big thing, is recognition for what they're doing. So it's not always just a business thing. So I think AI can help with that as well.
Mhm. Randy, your thoughts?
Sure. Well, um, one aspect of Gene, what you raised was how should I evaluate tools? And so one thing I look at is to try to understand, and especially historically would look at yearly, and it would be me and my team, and we'd look at all the tools that were in the market. We compare against the tools that we have to see, do we have what we need, or should we look to shift? Because, a lot of times those contracts are for multiple years. You're not just able to terminate for any particular reason, or maybe they're 3 years, but you can terminate during after a year or so, to try to understand what's the delta between what we have and what we might want, and then is the cost worth it? So certainly understanding where are the pain points, where do we see, where are our issues? Is it that we're struggling to get applications through the patent office to issuance? Is it we're struggling to provide visibility into the portfolio? Are we struggling perhaps with some quality on applications? And what tools are available to leverage? And then is that something that we should try to leverage internally, or is that something that we should mandate that our outside counsel utilize? And I think that for every particular tool, you can make those decisions. I mean, there were certainly tools that we saw historically are like, wow, that'd be really great, but it's not really a pain point for us, and we don't know that it's worth the money. So certainly in terms of like AI drafting type tools, I would consider it as long as I had the volume. I felt like I had the amount of time that I could support it and that it would be worth it. Because if I had to spend a lot of money for a tool that I could have just more easily sent the applications out to outside counsel, I don't think it's worth it for me to adopt it. But if I think, oh, I have enough volume with the pricing of the tool, and then to try to understand, well, how much time is it going to take to step this up and make it work? So really, it's, as we've all talked about, maturing.
Yeah, it is. And Justin, I want to get your thoughts on this too. Like from your perspective, where is that right curve? Where are you on the curve? Let me take another step. So like if I'm sitting in house, I've got maybe one or two attorneys, I've got a handful of filings, and then I'm thinking to myself, well, maybe we could do things different. Maybe we should do some of this stuff in house. Where do you
Yep.
see the right curve is where that conversation should start, and then maybe two, where it really is to the point where it's like, okay, well, you're big enough, you got to do something.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's not necessarily an all or nothing scenario too, because as Jason and Randy were talking about processes and how we do things, I was thinking about one area where if I were in-house right now, I would be bringing AI, whether it's a vendor or a commonly available solution, into the invention capturing process. So for example, one of the big issues that we often ran into is I would meet with inventors, we would try to understand the invention, make a decision, we bring in outside counsel, and then they would often start all over again. They would put inventors through the same interview process and questions. So we migrated and started developing these packages of information that we would build ourselves based on our interviews with inventors and give it to outside counsel. But you can imagine today, if you have a Zoom meeting with an inventor, get the transcript, put it into Claude and ask it to summarize it and start to build a really good set of information, you can hand off to outside counsel to reduce the time the inventor's spending with it, but also to really prop them up to be able to write a better application faster. And that's another area where I think, Randy, you were talking about patent drafting tools. It's a really interesting future when you think specifically about how do I implement a patent drafting tool in my environment. If you're a law firm picking them up, obviously there's a clear path to implementation. But if you're Randy or Jason, what does that look like? Are you doing a draft yourself and then handing it to outside counsel and asking them to smooth it? Are they willing to do that? What does that even look like? It becomes complicated when you really think about what that looks like. No matter how this goes, though, I think one key piece will be, I think technology can really help develop a good, TLDR, so to speak, of the technology to help whoever's drafting to use these products and to do it better and faster.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hey, Gene, I was just jumping in here. I think an important point is where you're at in the process. So an invention disclosure, as Justin was saying, is a kickoff point, right? that's where you're probably going to have the most attention from inventors. That's where you're going to spend the most time. So bringing something to the table at that first invention disclosure meeting and getting the most out of that meeting, recording it and doing all those things is very important. So maybe you can use AI tools to develop some preliminary things to talk about with the inventors, or maybe a sample claim set that you're going to eventually change later or something. Just having talking points to walk through those things, I think bringing them to the table is really helpful.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
that
and
that's a great use case for AI. AI is very good at summarizing things, and it's also very good at harmonizing things too. So I find sometimes when you get something information in writing, or you have a call like this, a Zoom call, or pre-call for a panel that we're doing at a program, or a pre-call for this webinar. If you can record it and get a transcript from that, and then you can kind of say, feed this into AI, and okay, now I got to harmonize what I thought we were going to talk about and what we want to talk about. And then, so I see the use case very clearly for getting information in writing about the invention, having a call with the inventor or the team or the managers. What are you trying to accomplish? Now you get all this information in, and then you can put it together very, very quickly and efficiently. And even if you're not going to do the drafting yourself, giving that package to outside counsel has got to be valuable.
Gene, if I could, I'm sorry, I see a
Sure.
couple of comments in the chat. Not all AI operates by the model that what you put into it is used to train the models.
Right.
There's a really important clarification about the role of AI. Obviously, we don't want to put information in that's going to be trained and constitute a public disclosure, but it is fairly routine at this point to set up a private instance of AI that will not train on your data, that will use it and maintain it confidentially. So, a really important point to be looking at with whatever approach you take, even with Claude, there are settings that you can adjust so that training doesn't occur, up to vendor solutions that are engineered that way out of the box. But sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to point
No,
that
it's a
out.
good point. We get that question a lot, and yes, you're right to be concerned about it, but don't believe that everything you put into AI is going to go into some public database and be available and kill the trade secrets and kill patentability. It's not how it is anymore. Maybe it never really was always that way. I think it probably was at the very beginning, but very quickly confidentiality became. But always satisfy yourself that whoever you're working with has checked those boxes.
Right.
So
Yeah.
all right, guys, let
And
me move on to the next, because we've been kind of kicking around some of this already about your data and who owns what, and is it all or nothing. Justin, I'll start with you this time. Do you want to lay out the problem, the pain point here, and explain your thoughts on it?
Yeah, so again, going back to the concept of maturity, I think the default that most organizations assume is that outside counsel will maintain the docket. And there's a lot of reasons for that, including just simply having people on staff who can manage data and who can keep up with the docket and do all those, everything that's required with managing your docket. I think it's a really interesting challenge, because people will often say, I'm just going to defer it, I'm going to leave it that way, it's okay. But what happens if you get frustrated with counsel and you want to change firms? Moving your data, it gets difficult. What about reporting? In one role, when we would get questions from leadership about how many patents we had or what a particular portfolio looked like in our portfolio, we were paying $400 an hour to get reports from the outside counsel of over what we had, the sort of thing that even rudimentary Excel tools can answer very quickly. So I think, as I said, this all or nothing thing, as you look at the role of docket management, right? There's a piece of deadline management, keeping up with your deadlines, keeping track of all of your, all of the correspondence and so on. But there's also a fundamental piece of what do we own, and so as you think you're through your maturity approach, someday you probably want to have complete control over all of your docket, all of your data. But there's also a middle ground where you at least can know what your portfolio includes, so that you can do your own reporting, and you can be a better advisor to the business about what new disclosures mean, how they compare to previous disclosures, and so on. The other piece too, and Gene's alluded to this a few times, technology is changing very quickly. There's agent automation now. You can connect to Patent Center and have communications automatically be docketed into your system. So the argument that I don't have staff to do this anymore starts to get harder to maintain as these tools can really automate so much of that work for you. One thing I wanted to mention before we were talking about outside counsel and inside counsel is we had a matrix approach to this at one of my companies where we had a plot of strategic importance versus risk, and you build it's a quad chart, and the nature of that work dictated if something was outside counsel or not. But you think about things like docket management and risk; it's a huge issue, and so you really probably want to think really carefully about how that gets managed as you make your technology transitions as well.
So, Randy, let me ask you this because I know you've been at both larger companies with larger portfolios, and you've been at smaller, more nimble, maybe even startup field type companies where you've kind of had to help them grow up the food chain, if you will. What do you say about all this? I mean, I can imagine that, like, if every time you need a query about what it is you get going on your docket or what it is that you own, you get a bill for three, four, $500. That's going to eat your patent budget and make a lot of other things harder to afford. When you're first starting out, I don't know that you can do it any other way because the investment required to have this, although going down with technology, is not zero. So where's the right balance in your mind?
So for starting from scratch, I always would like to track something in either like Google Sheets or Excel, and historically would track patents. And so throughout the process, I'd track inventions separately. I'd have my own internal numbering systems on both. And also, by the way, would track trademark searches and also trademark portfolio as well. And so I would have different sheets for those. And I would say that would have lesser information than would be in a docketing system. And so this would also be something that I could share with other people in legal or maybe key technology or business partners so they could see overall status. Obviously, there's reasons why, especially as you get bigger or the information is sensitive, you may not want all that information to be shared or owned by everybody. There could be some limitations on that. But certainly having that information available allows you to answer questions. And I think to Justin's point, you don't want to have to turn to outside counsel and ask for all of that information. But I think it's important, even if you don't have an internal docketing system, that you collect and structure your information in a way that will allow you to facilitate going to a docketing system, having adopted a docketing system before. If you don't have information in a way that potentially they can input it, then it might take you a lot of effort to bring everything up to speed. And so, for instance, one of the things that happens if you're first in-house counsel at a company, or maybe you're at a company where it wasn't more tightly managed before, there was no tracking numbers for the invention disclosures. They're just all on a file. So you're going to have to probably date them by year, give them whatever kind of numbering system that you have. Maybe you have to make the system for the patents and the patent families, and you have your unique numbering system so that if you ultimately adopt the docketing system, you'll be able to just put all those spreadsheets in and have it be more viable for you. And certainly the tracking numbers are something that I share with outside counsel. Historically, I've not used tracking numbers for trademarks because of the marks and the classes. I feel like that's enough to be able to distinguish them. And I feel like on the sheets themselves, that's relatively easy to manage. But when it comes to patent families, if I don't have my own numbering system that I can immediately look at it and see what it is, I don't know what I'm talking about. And so I absolutely want to have my numbering system to be used in combination with outside counsel for both patents and invention disclosures.
Mhm. Jason, any thoughts on this? Just open-ended. You want to respond to anything Justin or Randy have said, or take the
Yeah,
conversation
I would
a step
say
forward?
the key there is what Randy just said. I think, understanding and making it your own and having your own labeling and things like that. Because I've seen where you implement a docketing system if you don't have one, and it could take 3, 6 months to get up to speed and get all your data, input. And also, you tend to look at that and then go back and say, wait, it's missing a whole bunch of stuff, a whole bunch of metrics, a whole bunch of information that I thought would have been in there. There's not a lot of correlation between the data. So I say going back and doing your own analysis and tracking it and making sure you have your own data points and KPIs or analytics that you want for correlating this data and making it all, come together. For example, products. maybe you have a bunch of patents or trademarks or things that are related to products in your organization, and you need to map that. You can do that with these new advanced, docketing tools and with all the integrations, but you have to actually provide that information, and they can then begin, understanding and then track. And then I think it's also great. I want to add that I think it's great to have your own docketing system, as Randy said, to plug and play if you do have outside counsel, but also for engaging the business into that. So maybe you can give them user accounts and access, and maybe they want to do some reporting or some very specific metrics or tracking that they can get from the tools, capabilities that they have today. So I think that's a really cool aspect to consider as well.
And I think, Gene, one other factor too, I think makes sense that goes hand in hand with this is I feel like in-house counsel absolutely should be on a joint customer number with outside counsel. I feel like that's fundamental. And so if you're in-house and you're not on a joint customer number with outside counsel, you should, because that's going to give you access to the information on Patent Center. That's going to give you an ability to access the information. And otherwise, these queries are coming up and there's literally no way for you to get that information.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Gene, I'm sorry if I could. Jason made a point I just wanted to follow up on. Is Jason talked about how it can take months to implement an IP management system. It's something I experienced firsthand too. To me, one of the things that means is the earlier you do this in your portfolio build, the better. It only gets harder and harder and harder as your portfolio gets bigger and bigger to really implement a system that can be your source of truth that you will believe in and trust. So a lot of people say, well, we'll get to it when we're bigger. It's like this is something that really it's much easier to implement this when you're starting out than when it's later. So it's an area that I would prioritize as soon as you can for my it's a mistake I've made myself.
Yeah. So
sorry, Gene, back to you.
No. That I wanted to ask you about that anyway, because like it seems like in my mind, there's always, when you're starting out, there's what you should be doing, and sometimes it costs a little bit more than what you need, and you kind of convince yourself not to go down the best practices path. And I get that, when you're small, you got to be more nimble sometimes. But at some point in time, you got to clue in and say, okay, well, we're big enough that now we got to do things right. And you probably, hopefully, are going to do that before it's such a huge project to go backwards and reconcile all the other stuff that you have going on. But it strikes me, Justin, I'd like you to comment on this, is that this is why you as an in-house department really need to be picking up on what Randy said, have transparency with your outside team and maybe use the same tools so you're communicating with the same thing, so you got visibility into what they're doing, they have visibility into what you're doing, and that your systems talk to one another. Can you address that piece of this?
Yeah, I agree. 100%. And that's important in so many areas. Obviously Randy pointed out many of those important areas, like head case number alignment and so on. It's even becomes mundane issues like where is a patent application in the review process? How often we've had version 2 in review, and yet you find out version 5 is floating around and an inventor is working on it. So having having basically dashboards that give you visibility into the workflow of, if you have 10 patent applications in flight in parallel, it's really useful to have a simple dashboard that will show you this one is with this inventor waiting for their review. This one's with outside counsel waiting for their review. I see people increasingly in my role run across companies where they're giving outside counsel access to their in-house system. And outside counsel is probably doing some double data entry in their system and the other, but at the bare minimum is letting them have access to it. And there's lots of interesting things you can do with role-based permissioning too, right? I think somebody talked about confidentiality and we don't want everybody to see everything. Is you can set up a system so that there are certain fields that'll be visible only to people with certain roles, and outside counsel won't see that. But it's really helpful to have a place to collaborate. One area where I think there's a great opportunity for technology is just simply managing the workflow of the back and forth of documents, right? So much of what we do is you get a document, you review it, you give it to the next person, and you just keep moving along the process. And that's a great opportunity for technology to help smooth things.
And that may be a good segue to go into what we wanted to talk about next here. So let me push this, which is streamlining this in-house outside relationship. And one of the pieces, and Randy, maybe we could start with you here, is how do you avoid duplicating the work? How do you make sure that, and because if you're duplicating the work, then you're just overpaying for stuff that's unnecessary. You want to do it once, do it right. Um, and it also strikes me is that when you're in that space where you're starting out and you don't have maybe the systems in house that you know you need eventually or that you want or what have you, that's when you're most at risk of having duplication of efforts.
Sure.
Um,
I think a lot of it is trying to set expectations with outside counsel for where you're at, what your systems and process looks like, where you're at from a maturity perspective, and what you're expecting outside counsel to do as part of the process. So, for instance, if you have an internal docketing system, you're going to tell outside counsel, look, here's what we expect from you. Here's the end result is we want this draft and we're going to finalize and file it. It's going to be in our name. It's going to be in your name, however you're going to work it, but to set those expectations. And I think that really helps avoid duplication of work because otherwise I think I'm doing something and we think we're doing it internally. Outside counsel thinks it's doing something and then the bills start rolling in. I know one time we looked to expand outside counsel, and there was an opportunity to do that. And we were interviewing firms. And I explained to the firm, I said, hey, this is what we do, and this is how we operate internally, and this is what our process looks like. And they're like, that's great. This is what we do. This is how we operate, and this is how you work with us. And I'm like, no, 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 I don't think you're hearing me. This is our and it was literally such a bad conversation that the person who set us up with their in-house patent counsel, I sent her a message and said, "This feels like a bad date. When do we get to end this?" And of course, we didn't engage that firm, but it truly felt like it because I was saying one thing about what I wanted,
yeah.
and they were not able to support it or were unwilling to. And so I think that when you think of all of this in terms of the duplication, what parts do you want to do? What parts do you expect them to do? And can your outside counsel work with you on that?
So let me ask you, what size, you don't have to tell me what company you were with at the time, but like what size company were you with when that happened? That
I mean, like we had reasonable volume. We already had like three, four different sets of outside counsel. I think
okay.
for me in general, my normal rule is I want to have enough work to keep outside counsel busy and but not so that I'm dominating all their work,
Right.
because it will allow them to have diversity of practice. And then for me to have diversity of counsel because anything can happen. You can have really, really great counsel and they retire, they go in-house, maybe they cryptocurrency and now they're millionaires. I don't know
Yeah, yeah.
what, but you don't want to
Hit the
have all
lotto.
your eggs in one basket. And so I like working with small teams at firms and then just kind of adding on. And so this was a point, Gene, where we knew that our existing firms were tapped out in terms of capacity. And so or either that or this isn't that situation, but you could also have a conflict or you're going in a
Yeah.
new area where someone can only do this work but can't do the other work. I know that happens like with semiconductors and maybe if
Mhm.
you're working with companies like Google or Amazon where you're working on the search product or the shop but not other areas and so it's more closely defined. So like the volume of work was there. They should have listened to us, but
So that's what I was getting at, because like if you're dealing with like a real truly small company, like and it's going to send you like a case here and there, or even if it's one a month, it's like okay, well that makes more sense. You should be fitting in with the way we do it. But if you got volume, that's not how it works. I tell you as the client what I need from you, and if you can't or do it or you're unwilling to do it, then I got to find somebody else.
For sure. I'll tell you one other trick I use for alignment, and all my outside counsel will laugh because they have the collection. I try to give them shirts and company merchandise when for that company where I'm working and make them feel like that they are absolutely part of the team.
Mhm.
Because it's important to me that that's how they feel, both in terms of the engagement and the relationship that they have with me.
Well, I think that's smart, and we've talked about that before because it gets them to be a part of the organization. It seems to me it would set the relationship up to be less transactional. Like, hey, I need this, you can do that, I'll pay you for that, and then we're going wait till next. To really being a part of the team, and that if they see something, they say something, and maybe you already know that, maybe you don't, and it builds a relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So.
it gets you to a second date.
Yeah.
Randy.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, and then hopefully across the finish line for a whole lot more, right? I mean, but and that's why I mean, how how long ago was that, Randy? How many years ago was that?
I'm thinking, what's the math? Maybe I want to say 7 or 8 years ago.
See, because it seems to me like that should have been different because for quite some time now, it has been very standard practice for companies of any real size to say, okay, here's what we do. Here are the systems that we use. We need to make sure we're on the same page. We want you to use the same systems. Here's how we like our applications drafted. This is what we don't like. And yeah, I mean, as an attorney, if you don't want to do it, that's fine. But I just don't know where the mileage is in telling clients, particularly today, telling clients, we're not going to do it the way that you want. But
I
um,
also asked them, are there pain points on our end? Is there something that I could be doing better to make things more efficient and easier on their side? Certainly, and I'm interested about Jason and Justin's perspective on this as well. But sometimes it's like our billing process or billing system
Sure.
issues, and so then I need to try to figure out some kind of workaround to make it so that it's going to be more efficient for them. That's one area where I've seen outside counsel said, "Hey, like it's taking forever to get paid, or you're taking 2% off the top, or like whatever the issue is, and then trying to figure out how can I address it."
yeah,
Yeah, I would say relationship management, as you said, is a two-way street. So getting their input's valuable. I think the things that have worked well for me and what I've seen, even when I wasn't running things, would be setting standard operating procedures, some kind of guidelines, some kind of relationship management, expectation management for
Right.
outside counsel. I think that really works. Like, where's the ball? Who has control over things? Like maybe they send an initial, you send them an IDF. Then what do they do? How do you set up the invention disclosure meeting? Like who has the ball? Like where is it? And so everyone knows. So you're not duplicating these, requests. Everyone's sending unnecessary emails and a bunch of red tape coming. So I think being very clear on that, understanding your pain points, as Randy and Justin have said, and maybe mapping that into a standard operating procedure so you eliminate some of those things, is something I found to be really useful.
Yeah, if I could follow
sure,
Jason's
go ahead,
point,
Justin.
yeah, we actually implemented SLAs, service level agreements, with our outside counsel that established expectations on how long it should normally take them to do a first draft, how long it should take for them to write an office action response, and so on. And so we had, there were clear expectations for everybody. That's really helpful. The other thing I wanted to mention is we were talking about, Randy was talking about making it easy to work with them. I've worked at organizations that viewed outside counsel ultra transactionally. You're here at an arm's length. You're going to do a job. You're going to go away, and that's it. Patenting is an area where I think it's so helpful for outside counsel to be deeply involved with you, to know what's going on. If they understand the state of your business, your priorities as a business, and so on, they can do such a better job with patent drafting. And so I do think it's obviously it costs more money to do that, but it pays off in terms of better patents. I worked next to an organization that when they had office actions, for example, they would basically put it out for bid. They would say, five law firms who represent us, here's an office action. Who's going to charge us the least to do it? And it just creates resentment and in a really awful working environment. So it's important to have them as partners, I think, and find a
Yeah,
Just to
firm that's
jump
willing to
in,
do that.
yep.
I'm
that
sorry.
was a great point, Justin. I just wanted to add, I think if you're smaller and you don't have the team internally to, harvest and get all these inventions, involving your outside counsel maybe in a harvesting session could be a really good approach and getting them in there and integrated. I've seen
Yeah.
that work really well.
Yeah, same. We every once in a while we would bring in outside counsel to participate in major sessions. It's anyway. Sorry. Thank you.
And Justin brought up a really good point too, which is, and this is my experience when I've been asked to drop fees below what I think is reasonable. I tell whoever's in the business or the technology space why I think that our costs are fair, and that if we lose outside counsel, there's going to be a gap to training whoever else is going to have
Yeah.
to come in to replace them. And that's going to have a financial and time impact. And so that's going to affect productivity, overall cost, likely quality, especially in the short term. And so trying not to be short-sighted by trying to, again, like bid down work or price it unfairly, it doesn't end up working.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Gene, I think that's why having an SOP makes a lot of sense there. You have metrics or ways you can say, oh, I need to cut a bill because you didn't meet this requirement or you didn't meet a timeline or something like that. So mapping those things out gives you a lot of leverage for managing that relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what, I'm just dumbfounded by going back to what Randy was saying before. It almost feels like that type of firm that is doing that is reluctant to give those metrics, to follow the metrics because they don't want to be judged by it. That's what it feels like to me. But that's a key part of the relationship. You as in-house counsel need to know what it is that your outside firms are doing, and your outside firms need to be willing to explain to you what they're doing, because not just from the, well, you build too much or we don't want to pay for that, but it's so important for in-house people to know what's being done, will know what they own, know what they're securing, know what they were not able to secure, and then also know whether or not there's better ways to be going about doing what they're trying to do. And sometimes I think that law firms don't realize just how overworked in-house departments really are. And your job ought to be to make their job easier. And if you're making their job easier, then you're just going to get more work. That's just the way it goes, right? Have you ever said no to somebody who made your life easier? No. I mean, it's human nature. So, all right, good. Guys, looking at the clock, we're down to about 8 minutes left. I want to make sure we get to this next slide here, which I believe, Randy, this was something you mentioned during the pre-call, if I have it correct. You used the term audit ready. I think it was you, right?
That's terminology that I use.
Yes.
Sure.
So what are we talking about here with audit ready?
Well, in my experience, when you're with an organization, it's going to have a certain level of maturity. And so people may be asking questions or they may not be asking questions like, how much are we paying for this? How do we track this? How do we know? What's the value? How much money are we making? And trying before the questions are asked as in-house counsel, planning for the inevitable questions. So what happens is that your organization matures, it combines with other organizations, people rotate around, consultants are hired, whatever the case may be, and people are going to start asking questions, and you don't want to have to say, it's going to take me a long time to be able to figure that information out. So trying to think of the questions that people are likely to ask and tracking and managing the information to it makes a lot of sense. For instance, having aggressive guides that says this is what we pay for this type of work, comparing it to industry metrics based on, for instance, like AIPLA or something similar, and saying, hey, we have really competitive pricing, because then if someone comes to you and says you need to drop your pricing by 25%, and explaining why that's not going to be a good idea, and talk about other alternatives about like maybe we need to try to go to the business and get funding, and not tell them the year that you need funding, tell them a year in advance so that they can plan ahead for that kind of funding. So those type of things of being prepared for the questions that you're likely to face. And then if you can't answer them immediately, like how would you do that? So you could think of it almost like a playbook, which is if someone says, I like help me understand what the risk profile is in the space. You don't want to say, I don't know. And you also don't want to say, let me talk to outside counsel. Already step through in your mind, what would that take? Like, okay, I need to know the competitors. I need to have access to some kind of tool that's going to chart it. I'm going to need to, make some additional verification to make sure that the appropriate things are in scope. How much time would it take? What would the cost look like? And so that I could deliver that. So if someone said, hey, this is the information I need, you could say, well, I don't have that, but I could get it to you for around this kind of price in this type of time frame. And then they could say, oh, it's worth it to me, or try to go with other options.
Yeah. Justin, anything to add there from your perspective?
No, not exactly what Randy said, but I saw an interesting comment that asked questions about setting schedules and timelines with outside counsel. Is obviously there's going to be lots of matter specific variances from things, but what we did that was pretty productive for us is we built a general schedule that said in general a patent application should take 2 weeks or 4 weeks, whatever it was, and then we actually task counsel with that particular case, we would specify any deviations. So if it was something that was extraordinarily difficult, we'd give it an extra week or two, whatever the case was. But I found that to be a really effective. So at one place, we had 5 different law firms who represented us for patent work, and it was a really useful way to begin to compare and contrast performance of one firm versus another, of how well they actually delivered within those schedules that we were expecting. And it was a useful thing. If there's any other response to that from the audience, I'd be happy to take questions. But I just wanted to address that one thing. And if I just while I have the floor for 1 second,
Go ahead.
saw some interesting comments too in the chat about using or about using AI to look at obviousness issues and so on. AI is really interesting in a couple of areas. One big area is removing bias from the process. You can use often you would meet with the inventor. Why should we care? Tell me about your invention. They have a very specific perspective on why they think it's important, but AI can be great to bring up contrary points and to pressure test what the inventor believes to be true about their thing. It's also another thing is seeing really neat uses where you can ask AI, tell me about the competitive advantages of this idea. Essentially, is this a little invention or is it a big invention? Where on the continuum is that? And those advantages can then really play into your obviousness arguments to set the scene to help you write a better application that says, oh wow, look at this invention. It's so big that it does these things. So some really neat uses for AI there. I know those are one-offs, but I saw a few good comments in the chat. So,
No,
thank you.
great. Excellent. So, guys, we're coming down to the wire here. I want to give each of you an opportunity to wrap up with your final thoughts here and your takeaway message. And while you think about what it is that you might want to say to the audience on the way out here today, I'm going to launch our last poll question, which is, if anybody is interested in learning more about Tradespace and hearing from the Tradespace team, please feel free to answer this question. We'll make sure that they get in touch with everybody who's interested in learning more about what they're doing. But let me go, and Jason, I can start with you, and Justin will give you the final word here today. What is your takeaway message for the audience? If there's one thing that they remember from today, what do you hope that one thing is? Jason.
Yeah, I think it's important to understand your business objectives and your pain points, and then map that to the expectations you give to your outside counsel. So, like I said, with an SOP, a standard operating procedure, something like that, help them help you, make your job easier, but also lay out expectations very clearly. And I think you can do that. And also, with IP, sometimes when you're in an organization, as Justin said, it may not be at the top of the list of, business matters. So you got to toot your own horn. You got to, have these metrics and use AI and things like that you can actually develop them and send them up to your management and to your own horn, give recognition to what you're developing and all the great work you're doing. So I think those things, setting expectations to your business, and then obviously managing your IP, but also the relationship and the viewpoints, from other stakeholders.
Excellent. Great. Thanks a lot, Jason. Randy, your final thought here today.
Sure. I think the advice I have is a practical one, which is for yourselves, try to set a goal of how you want to improve yourself and your organization. How am I going to get a little better each day? And how am I going to work towards a bigger goal? And so whether that's trying to figure out ways to leverage AI to improve the quality of your drafting, trying to figure out how to mature the IP function at your organization, whatever you might be trying to do, none of these things are going to happen immediate, but trying to set the framework and understand, well, what pieces do I need to go from here to there makes sense. I know that when I watch seminars, sometimes I think, these things are table stakes. Everybody does this. And I hear other people say, gosh, oh no, I really wish my organization would do that. But having different perspectives and trying to build in your own mind how you would like to push forward is a great way to go. And so, Gene, I've always appreciated the IPWatchdog conversations to learn a diverse amount of perspectives, and that includes the participants who are providing feedback here. So thank you to all of them as well.
Great. Well, thanks for being here, Randy. It's always a pleasure to see you. And Justin, the final word here today goes to you. What is your takeaway message?
Yeah, I'm very excited about the future of AI. Obviously, there's doom scenarios that are alarming, but I would encourage people to really start thinking about the role of AI. There's many options. There's vendor solutions, of course, but there's also not vendor solutions that come with simple monthly subscription models. Give it a try. It can make a tremendous difference in how you're operating. Even something simple like invention disclosures. Take the inventor's PowerPoint. Don't ask them to fill out a form and plop that into AI to help you build that disclosure. There's so many areas along your day-to-day workflows where AI can make a massive difference for your inventors, for your outside counsel, and so on. It's that's my last comment. And thank you all. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here and appreciate all the good comments from the audience.
Yeah, I thought today was a really great conversation. It was in the chat I've been following along is a lot of good back and forth over there. I think we had a good conversation with the panelists. I appreciate panel you all being here today. I appreciate everyone in the audience joining us here today as well. And hopefully we'll see you again soon, but that's all we have for today. So thanks for participating and we'll see you soon. Bye for now, everyone.
Thanks,
Bye, everybody.
everyone.